Okay guys, it's Mike Fielding here, just back for the third part of my story. So I have done, as I say, 2 videos already, so you can obviously watch those as if you haven't already, just to get up to speed. But just if you don't get a chance to catch them, just a quick summary is that I had a scuba diving incident that had left a nitrogen bubble on my spinal cord at the thoracic level, which then meant that I was paralyzed from the rib cage down. And so in the last video I was just describing how I basically just was starting to accept that as my reality, that I had no movement of my legs, no movement of my core, I couldn't roll over, couldn't sit up, and just talking about the fact that, you know, that was just one moment in time, and just how I was able to pull myself into more positive ways of thinking by thinking of it as just one moment at a time and then moving on. You know, there'll be a better moment coming up, there'll be a better tomorrow, for example. Anyway, I did also mention that I wanted to talk about some of the visualizations and meditation sort of techniques that I was using to help me with that, because it's all very well me sort of saying, oh yeah, just, you know, start thinking positively, but just to give you a bit of an example. So one of the things that I really like is I like watching non-mainstream media documentaries and shows, because they're non-censored and you can just gain a lot of information from these types of shows. And so I subscribe to a channel called Gaia, G-A-I-A, and that has a lot of yoga and meditation titles, but it also has a lot of other things about ancient civilizations. And there's a show on there called Wisdom Teachings, and that's by a guy called David Wilcock. And I actually really liked his content and read his book called The Source Field Investigations. In fact, read it twice. And there's a lot of really good information in that book where it's talking about the source field, which is a connection between all living things. And it goes into talking about the first person that developed a lie detector test, hooked up the lie detector, the polygraph machine, to plants, and then had thought processes, negative thought processes towards the plants, like I'm going to burn the leaves, and the plant had a response. Yeah, it had an anxiety type response, like the same sort of response as you would get when you're interrogating someone who's, you know, lying. And so that was interesting, and basically just showing that there is this connection. But what I really wanted to talk about was that some of the other information that's in there is talking about the fact that if you have a vacuum, a room with nothing in it whatsoever, and you fire photons of light into that room, you get the individual photons just dotting about randomly in the room. However, if you put a strand of DNA in that room and then fire photons of light into it, the photons of light just assimilate along the double helix shape of the DNA. Right? So you have this double helix shape in photons. But the really interesting thing is that then when you take the DNA molecule out, you get this double helix phantom DNA staying there, and it stays there for up to 30 days. So there's been a lot of research that's showing that the body, DNA molecules in the body store light, okay? Because we've got 9 trillion DNA molecules in the body, and, you know, they're all storing, you know, hundreds of thousands of photons each. So you can imagine that's a lot of photons. So effectively, the idea is that you've got a holographic you, like an energetic component to being alive, like to you know, an energetic component as well as a physical component. So this is all information that I was armed with, and I knew it in a, you know, like just the concept and the theoretical way. But one of the positive things to come out of this is I've then really been able to put this into practice and have this experiential experience of it. And what I mean by that is I was, you know, thinking about the fact that when there's certain cancers in the body, like actually all the different types of cancers, you get this scrambling effect of the photons, photons of light. In other words, the DNA in your body does not store light in the right way. And so it's been theorized that basically if you can actually think about being coherent in your thought processes, okay, and actually having a very positive emotion, like a heart-based emotion, like a compassion or empathy or love, you get an electromagnetic field around your body that's very coherent, and that electromagnetic field is 5,000 times stronger than the electromagnetic field of your brain. So it influences your brain to then release certain hormones and enzymes and just chemistry to then actually affect the body. So in other words, by having these positive thoughts, you can create a coherent situation where you can actually then start to signal to your body that it can start to heal, okay? And that's tied up with that your body will then start to store light better, that there's light in the coming in and penetrating, and it's not just the visible light. As you know, you've probably heard of UV light and infrared. We can't actually see that. We have to put on certain technical goggles to actually see that, so technology to allow us to see it, but it exists. And we wouldn't have known that if we didn't have the technology. But there's also all frequencies of light that our technology can't even detect. So there's all of this going on around us, all this energy. And so the idea being that if you can get yourself into a coherent state, you can absorb the light, and it can then travel in your DNA molecules and help you heal. And part of this is demonstrated with the placebo effect. For example, people have faith, people feel loved, people have positive emotions, and they heal themselves in 33% of cases. So a third of all cases, no matter what it is that they have, cancer, heart disease, whatever, it's across the board. So anyway, I'm armed with this knowledge, and I'm in bed. I cannot move. I've got no movement whatsoever, and I'm doing guided meditations where I'm putting the headphones on and just listening to these positive guided meditations, and really trying to focus on having this coherence in my body, coherence in my energy waves, my heart-based emotion. It's creating this coherence so that the light enters my body and can actually start it healing. So I'm focused on this, and I was focusing on it for 45 minutes, an hour at a time, and then starting to think about trying to move, and where I had no movement before, boom, then I had movement. So I'm focusing on it, and boom, my feet start to move. And this is coming from absolutely no movement to some. So it's a big deal, right? And I continue to use that to start to get flickers and start to get some actual work going on in my body, some movements. So that was right early on, from day 2 onwards. And I managed to get to a place where I was able to understand that if I got enough work happening or energy happening in my quads and in my glutes especially, even though I was really struggling with other movements, I didn't have any movement in my hip flexor, so I couldn't really move my legs around in bed, but I was getting energy and work going on in those muscles. So I knew that I was ready to start to think about, at the end of day 4, think about standing up, using a frame, of course. And at this point, I just wanted to make a point about the fact that, we're in Zanzibar. So there was a few challenges with that, being in hospital in Zanzibar, in the sense that when I first realized that, I think I'm ready to try it, to stand up with a frame, I asked for the frame, and the nurses there didn't really know what it was they had. We had experience of asking for things and then not knowing, whether they had it or not, asking a few more times and finally getting what we wanted. So we knew not to take their first answer at face value. So I asked for a frame. No, we don't have one. I'm like, well, there's a physio department on this floor. Went and looked. No, there's nothing there. And I'm like, okay, I'll accept that there's no frame if you go and look in every floor of this hospital and look around. I can't believe there's not at least one frame somewhere in this hospital. So please, could you go and look? And then, if it's no, then it's no, but please don't just say no. Could you please look? And, the nurse went off, and, 20, 30 minutes later, boom, materialized with this fairly rickety frame, but we got a frame. But it's just to make the point that, there were these challenges which, as we continued, we actually started to feel that it was a little bit, funny, a little comedic, because you just couldn't, believe some of the time how the hospital can operate like it did. But, look, it could have been a lot worse. And so we, rather than, getting stressed and pissed off about it, it was what it was, and we rolled with it. you know, another example is just when I wanted to go to the bathroom, the private room had a bathroom, so I managed to stand up with the frame. I can literally only take a couple of steps and then get into the wheelchair. Okay, let's wheel the wheelchair into the bathroom. Boom. No, the wheelchair doesn't fit in the bathroom. So, you know, like the ergonomic design of the room, you know, in the bathroom, the toilet had no special handles or anything. So we were dealing with all of these kind of other little things that you wouldn't necessarily have to deal with if you weren't in that place, like if you're in hospital in Australia, for example. So I just wanted to make that point. But anyway, it's just a point that you just have to roll with things. Like there was nothing we could do about that. So why get angry about it? Why get annoyed about that? That's just a waste of energy. Anyway, coming back to the visualizations, I want to fast forward a little bit and go into the situation where I was going to the chamber every day. I was having long treatments in the chamber. So for example, the first day was cut short. It was 2.5 hours, but it was cut short because I had to go to the hospital to have a catheter. The next day, the second day, was 8 hours. 8 solid hours in this chamber, followed by 7.5 the next day, followed by 7. You know, and those big long stints in the chamber were to disperse the nitrogen. Okay, and after about the first 3 or 4 days, the nitrogen's dispersed, and then what you need to do is oxygenate the tissues around the spinal cord by, you know, the whole time I was in there, I was breathing oxygen, having a few air breaks, but breathing oxygen. And at this point, I want to give a massive, massive shout out to Mr. Mahmoodi, because I ended up being in that chamber for 54 hours over 10 days. And other than the first day, which was Tammy, he was in that chamber every single day with me. And so he, you know, when I was very, very debilitated, he would actually help me move my legs and start to, you know, help me do things in the chamber, so that, you know, I owe a massive, massive thank you to him, because, you know, he really, really helped me, you know, emptying the catheter bag and things like that, you know, just, yeah, a massive thank you to him. So anyway, so I was in the chamber, and, you know, I didn't want to waste the time in the chamber. There's lots of time there. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to be doing stuff, partly because I, you know, wanted to fill the time. 7.5 hours, 8 hours is a long time, but you know, partly because I know that I needed to do the work to try and get some firing of these muscles, and so why not? Let's just get on with it. So, you know, I was doing that in the chamber, and one of the things I was focusing on, another visualization that I was doing, was I was trying to get to a point where I could sit up, because as I said to you, I was wobbly, I had no core, so I couldn't sit. So I was sitting just with my arms holding me up, but I was concentrating, and this is the physio training and Pilates training, to try and get a deep back muscle called multifidus to switch on, which energizes the deep core by rocking and doing some pelvic tilting. And I was doing that and getting into a point where I was then in a neutral spine position, trying to energize my deep core. And it was, you know, a challenge to be in that position, to have that endurance in that position. And then I thought, well, if I can now stay there, which I could get to a point where I could just stay there, can I now stay there and actually start to, you know, create a stability challenge by moving my arms, pumping my arms like I was walking really fast or even running? And then I had a thought process, because my hip flexors were so switched off, I couldn't lift my legs. But what I could do is just get a little bit of movement by lifting my heels slightly off the floor. That was about all the movement I had. So I thought, well, if I'm going to sit up, right, and really focus on this upright posture and start moving my arms like I'm running, why not just imagine that I am in fact running, instead of being in this chamber like inside, I'm out, I'm free, I'm outside, the sun is shining on me, you know, it's a breeze that's rushing past my face as I'm starting to run, and just really focus on just running through the countryside, and how wonderful that would feel, how free I felt. And so as I'm doing it, I'm pumping the arms and I'm feeling the core starting to work, and then I'm thinking equal and opposite. As this arm comes forward, I start to lift the heel on this side, and vice versa. So it's like I'm running and really feeling the wind and feeling that freedom, and just imagining my legs sailing in front of me. And as I'm doing it, I'm just getting more and more movement and lift at the hips, as I was telling my body, you know, or reminding my body, it knows, it has the information, it's done this before. There is the neurology there is the connections there that know how to run, okay? And by having that real visualization, that feeling, and putting that into my body, I was starting to try and get signals going through. So again, it's just another example of how you can use visualization to good effect, and that actually by really focusing and living it and really feeling it, you can actually then start to have physical manifestations. So as I say, that's just another example. I continued to progress using those techniques. I continued to be able to then start to walk with a rollator. At first just small distances, and then because I was realizing I was just stepping with the frame, just stepping to the frame, and I wanted to walk reciprocally one after the other to normalize. And I started to do that as I was continuing to have chamber treatments, and I was looking forward to the point when I wasn't going to have to be going to the chamber each day, even though the treatments did get shorter. So we were doing 5-hour sessions for the last few days. It was still a drain. It was still taking up a lot of time. But I wanted to definitely make sure that I was projecting forwards and thinking that it's going to end. I'm not going to be coming into the chamber, and then I'll have more energy and focus to actually then put into exercises, which I was doing all the time. I was doing exercises on the stability ball, and whatever I could as far as doing some bridges and some Pilates stuff, just again to continue to progress. So as I say, that the main thing I wanted to talk about was the use of the visualizations and the positive thinking. This fact that if you create a coherent thought process or a coherent emotion, really, like that heart-based emotion, you're creating a situation where your body can actually heal. And that's why it's so important to be positive and not to go down that negative route. So I'm going to give you a little bit more information on the next video. I will sign off in a minute. At this point, if I just say we got to the first 6 days when I was in hospital, got discharged from that, which was a great moment. I was still having to go to the chamber, but I was actually able to have a bit more normalcy in the evening, because I was able to just spend time with Lindsay in the evenings in a hotel as opposed to being in the hospital. But as I say, I was really looking forward to the point where I wouldn't have to go to the chamber, and that I could actually then spend some more time with her. And I'll tell you about that. I'll tell you about how we managed to get back some semblance of a holiday that was taken away from us on the next video, when